an early election to get a popular mandate for his Prime Ministership and for his new government against a Labor Party which would be unready for an election and having no real policies.
Paul Kelly, thanks very much for that analysis. Well, our first guest is the Assistant Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg. He's one of the rising stars in the Liberal Party, and he has well and truly hitched himself to Prime Minister Tony Abbott over the past 48 hours with giving strong support. He joins us now live out of Melbourne. Thanks very much for your company.
Nice to be with you, Peter. Hi, Paul.
Let me ask you straight up about this breaking news, which is that Malcolm Turnbull made it quite clear that he thought that Tony Abbott was doing the right thing by leaving the party room meeting for Tuesday. He was praising his judgment in respect to that, and within an hour of all of that happening, the Prime Minister has announced that he's going to shift it forward to Monday instead. It's on, isn't it?
Look, I think this is a sensible decision to bring it forward to Monday morning. I mean, nobody could see it as it being in the interests of the Liberal Party and the government for this distraction to continue beyond Monday.
Well, Malcolm Turnbull is one that thought it should be Tuesday. I mean, he spelt out in quite some detail this morning why he thinks it's better to stick with the plan for Tuesday. So you're basically saying he's dead wrong.
I think he is wrong on that, absolutely. And, you know, Malcolm's absolutely entitled to his view, but, I mean, we've got, got a government to get on with the job of governing, and this has been very disappointing and a distraction for the government over the last 2 weeks. So you couldn't imagine going into question time with the spill motion hanging over the Prime Minister's head for the next day.
Minister, you've been strongly supporting Tony Abbott. What's your view about how this spill motion will go in the party room tomorrow?
I think it should be defeated, and I think it will be defeated. And the reason being, Paul, is that the Australian people emphatically rejected the cloak and dagger politics that was so reminiscent of the 6 years of the Labor government, when the Prime Ministership of this country was decided around a lazy Susan at the local restaurant. We're better than the Labor Party. That's what they did. That's not what we're going to do. We've never torn down a Prime Minister with the Liberal Party in his first term. Indeed, when John Gorton won the election in '69 and was tore down in 1971, the following year they got Gough Whitlam in 1972. This is the Liberal Party. We're better than Labor. We don't tear down our Prime Ministers like they do, and I think it would just bring further instability and uncertainty to the party. When we have big challenges, and let's not beat around the bush, we've made some mistakes, we've hit some own goals, but I think we can learn from those experiences. Tony Abbott is a good listener, but he was also selected by the Australian people to be Prime Minister, and he deserves his chance to make amends.
I know Paul Kelly wants to follow that question up, but just quickly, if I could just announce that the Prime Minister will make a press statement at 9 a.m. We'll bring that to you live here at Sky News. We'll cross to that no matter where we're at on the program, 9 a.m. So around about 20 minutes from now, he'll make a press statement. So by the sounds of it, not take questions. Sorry, Paul.
Now, the risk, of course, is that even if Tony Abbott wins on the spill motion, the issue won't go away and that his opponents will come back. So I'd like to ask you, what sort of vote does Tony Abbott need in order to try and stabilise the government once and for all?
Well, you're asking me to get into the area of the hypothetical there. I think if this spill motion is defeated, that will be a strong sign of support for the Prime Minister, and he will be able to get on with the job of governing. And the next big...
But Mr Frydenberg, you know that you can't just say if it's defeated that's a strong sign. It comes down to how emphatically or otherwise it's defeated. So, for example, even if they only get 20 votes, if we work on the assumption of frontbench solidarity in terms of voting for the Prime Minister, that's still nearly a third of the backbench that would have given a no-confidence motion in the Prime Minister. Is that sustainable?
Well, I'll leave it to journalists like yourselves to go through the entrails of whatever the vote result may be. It's not for me to be a commentator on that vote, but also to preempt what may be the decision of the party room on Monday.
Well, let me then ask you, the whole problem here is that Tony Abbott's ratings in the country are too poor and too many backbenchers feel that he can't recover. So what's your view about what Tony Abbott should do if in fact he does prevail Monday? How can he recover in the country?
Well, Paul, you and Peter are both students of history, and you're right. Tony Abbott's, polling is behind Labor, and his approval rating is down. But Let's go back to John Howard's time in government, 2001. February 2001, his approval rating was 28%. That led to the Shane Stone memo in May, and he recovered, and by November he won a 16-seat majority. You go internationally, another great doyen of Conservative politics, Margaret Thatcher, 1980, her approval rating, 18 months into office, about the same time as Tony Abbott, was down at 23%. She said the lady is not for turning, and what happened 3 years later, she won a landslide victory.
But that answer can't suffice. I mean,
well,
there's no point going back to the past about John Howard and Margaret Thatcher. Let's talk now. Let's talk 2015. What does Tony Abbott have to do if he wins tomorrow to improve his position in the country?
I think he has to do three things. First, he has to narrow his policy focus on the things that matter to the Australian people. I'm thinking particularly around jobs, families and the lower cost of living. And we've seen with electricity prices coming down dramatically, the 25 basis point interest rate cut and oil prices halving over the last year, major spin-offs for a lower cost of living for Australian families. That's got to be his policy focus. And he needs to get out among the people in the pubs and the clubs to talk about those issues. That's the first thing I think he needs to do. The second thing I think he needs to do is to put a blowtorch on the Labor Party. We've had the Shadow Assistant Treasurer come out in recent days and say he's in favour of bringing back the carbon tax and the mining tax. We've had Chris Bowen also say he's in favour of increased taxes. We've got to make Labor pay for that. It worked very effectively in opposition. Now it can also work effectively in government. And the third thing is he clearly needs to consult more deeply with his colleagues and take them with him on the policy decision-making process. I mean, we had some own goals like I referred to. The Medicare co-payment, we hanged on to that for too long out of the budget process. The 40 job searches per month was clearly an unpopular decision at the time. And of course, everyone refers to the Prince Philip issue as being a barbecue stopper for all the wrong reasons. That being said, I think if he can consult more broadly with his colleagues, bring in the chairman and the chairwomen of the backbench committees, and of course speak more freely with the outer ministry, not just the cabinet, that could all augur pretty well for him going forward.
Okay, well, should he make changes in personnel?
Look, that's a question for him, but I don't foresee him doing that. The speculation today about the Treasurer, Joe Hockey, I think is just gumph. I mean, the Prime Minister has very strong support for Joe Hockey, and that's because Joe Hockey is doing a very important and a very good job. I mean, that's just, a tactic from those who are seeking to undermine the Prime Minister. And I just don't think it's for me to talk about personnel just changes. I think he's very happy with his team and they're doing an important and good job.
Josh Frydenberg, you just mentioned that one of the things that he should do in terms of more consultation would be to bring chairs of the backbench committees and so forth in for a better dialogue. That's quite different to the message through the media that some of his frontbenchers have been saying about the backbenchers that have instituted this leadership spill. They've been described as no-hopers on the margins. That's hardly a way to kind of bring the backbench, which is where this revolt is coming from, and the front bench together, is it?
Well, certainly I haven't used that language, and I'm not, familiar with other, colleagues who have used that language as well.
Erica Betts is the one that was a bit dismissive, and there were others.
Well, every member of the coalition party room is vitally important. They have earned the right to sit in that room by virtue of being selected by a lower house constituency or being selected by their party in their state to be a senator. I mean, they're very important members. And Don Randall, Luke Simpkins, who brought this spill motion, are absolutely entitled to do so, and they're good friends of mine and valued colleagues. But we are all on the one side, Peter, is the message I'm saying. We're all Liberals. Our political opponents are the Labor Party, not ourselves. That's why if we've got differences about policy, we should air them internally, and the Prime Minister should listen to those, and we should make the adjustments accordingly.
But of course that isn't what's happened, because we do have this leadership spill now slated for tomorrow. Is your view that there is no good outcome here as a result of the trigger having been pulled on a leadership spill, whether you stick with a Prime Minister who has had to go through this kind of crisis publicly rather than behind closed doors, as you mentioned, or whether you change leaders and perhaps get compared to Labor as a consequence? Would you agree that there is now, like it or not, albeit with time to improve between now and the election, there is no good outcome to come out of tomorrow?
I don't believe that. I think if the spill motion is defeated, that is a good outcome for the Prime Minister and a good outcome for the party and for the government, and ultimately a good outcome for Australia, because they don't want to see the disunity and dysfunction which characterised Labor. Of course, I would have preferred the spill motion not to have been moved, and I would have preferred the last 2 weeks not to have happened, but it has. And if there is going to be a silver lining to the last 2 weeks, it is that there is a very strong message from members of the coalition party room that we need to make changes, that we do need to reset, we do need to reboot, we do need to better consult, and I accept all of that. But certainly it's for the Prime Minister to heed those messages and get on with the job of governing as he was elected to do.
Clearly, relations between Tony Abbott and Julie Bishop have been very badly damaged as a result of all these events. Can this be repaired?
Well, certainly I think they've had a very good relationship both in opposition and now in government, and you can speculate about the relationship. I certainly have not been privy to uncomfortable discussions between the two. Julie Bishop has said that she supports the Prime Minister in opposing this spill motion. She's done a wonderful job as Foreign Minister. She's been a very...
In her statement, that's what
Sorry?
she said she's required to support it because of cabinet solidarity. It was pretty guarded, wouldn't you agree?
Well, I think she's made the statement, which is that she supports the Prime Minister in opposing this spill motion, and both of them yesterday were out on the hustings together. Clearly, they have a big job to do. We're 10 points behind in the polls, and the party and the country expect us to govern in a much more unified fashion than we have.
But you'd have to agree, surely, that in terms of their relationship going forward, whether it's damaged or not, going to Paul's question, we have seen private conversations between just the two of them, which have been leaking into the media. We initially saw the discussion about whether or not Julie Bishop would rule out a challenge leaking into the media. By all accounts, reports were that she was very unhappy about that. We've then seen reports through Laurie Oakes's column yesterday of a private meeting that included a discussion about the presidency of the Liberal Party going back some time, obviously leaking as well. How can they trust each other to maintain confidences when it seems that discussions that there's barely anyone else in the room that are occurring are leaking?
Yeah, I mean, clearly those reports, and there have been earlier reports about NSC and ERC and trips to Lima, have all been aired, and I think that has been very unfortunate, disappointing and, destabilising, and it's probably got us to the position where we're at, which is that, we've spent the last 2 weeks talking about ourselves, Peter. So you're right. Those sort of things appearing in the media have had more of a negative than a positive impact. But hopefully, after Monday's spill motion is defeated, the air will be cleared and people will rally behind the Prime Minister, not forgetting that he was chosen by the Australian people to be our Prime Minister and to govern, and we can get on with the job of dealing with some of the difficult challenges that the country faces.
But look, I mean, if we're being realistic about this, why isn't Julie Bishop as deputy running on a ticket behind Tony Abbott?
Well, she's running against the spill motion. And
she's running against the spill motion, sure, but she's not running on a ticket with the Prime Minister.
But Paul, if you defeat that spill motion, Tony Abbott remains as Prime Minister, and it becomes therefore obvious that the team will rally behind him. So I think for me, that's as good as what you're positing as being an alternative approach.
Well, surely if she was supporting the spill motion, she'd have to quit, wouldn't she?
If she was supporting the spill motion, well, when you're asking me again to get into the realm of the hypothetical, I'm not going to go there. She's not.
It's just a matter of convention, Josh Frydenberg. Any frontbencher that comes out and says that they would support the spill motion, by definition, has to resign from the front bench. And perhaps that's one of the reasons why in excess of 25 frontbenchers have been silent over the course of the last 48 hours.
Well, you're obviously doing a tally that I haven't been. I've heard lots of frontbenchers, including, cabinet ministers, come out very strongly, whether it's been Matthias Gorman or George Brandis or Greg Hunt or Peter Dutton or Joe Hockey, the list goes on, have come out very strongly for maintaining their support for the Prime Minister and with getting on with the job of governing, and not going down the path, dare I say it, of the Labor Party, who have, knifed a number of Prime Ministers in recent years.
Now, I'd like to ask you whether you agree with the proposition put by the Prime Minister in his own defence. He's been saying during the course of the week that it's wrong for the party to change the Prime Minister. This ultimately is an issue which should be decided by the people. Do you agree with that?
Well, he's making the obvious point, Paul, that when millions of Australians went to the ballot box in 2013, they put their vote next to the Liberal or National parties because they knew that not only were they going to get their local member and their local senator, but they were going to get Tony Abbott as Prime Minister. That is undeniable. So therefore, yes, theoretically, it is the party room that after the election gathers to re-elect Tony Abbott as their leader and therefore Prime Minister. It is very much in practice the fact that when millions of Australians vote at an election, they vote knowing who the Prime Minister will be as the leader of a particular party.
OK, well, this is a very important point. Now, the logic of this is, if you accept Abbott's argument, do you agree that if Malcolm Turnbull becomes Prime Minister, then there would be pressure for him to seek a popular mandate and go to an election?
Good try, Paul. Again, I'm not going to speculate about a hypothetical, which is that the spill motion, I believe, will be defeated and Tony Abbott will remain as Prime Minister.
All right, Josh Frydenberg, we appreciate your time this morning on Australian Agenda. Don't be late to Canberra. The motion's been brought forward to tomorrow morning. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Paul.
We're going to take a break here on Australian Agenda.